Well, hello there, and Merry Christmas! This year for Christmas, we're getting no Doctor Who, unless you count that fishy spin-off, which that makes me a little sad. However, I want to go back to the Christmas of 2005 to talk about one of my favorite Doctor Who episodes, entitled The Christmas Invasion. Welcome to Tangent Studies, where there's a whole lot of tangenting and not a whole lot of studying. My name is Cademan David, or as Sycorax might call me, Mr. Cow. This episode starts how many of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who start, where we're out in space and then we slowly zoom into the planet Earth. This is a great way to start an episode of Doctor Who. You could almost see it as us being in space, seeing the entirety of the universe, and then the entirety of the universe comes to Earth, in being represented in this episode, of course, by the Sycorax coming to Earth. And that's something that then and current showrunner Russell T Davies really wanted for Doctor Who, is he wanted it to be centered around Earth. Not that there couldn't be different planets or different time periods, but he wanted his main plots to take place on present-day Earth so that we could have more attachment to the planet than we would if we were always out in outer space. This is something of a difference to something like, say, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. In Narnia, which I'm also a big fan of, you enter through the wardrobe into this magical world. But in Doctor Who, the Tardis, the wardrobe, crashes in your backyard. And who knows what aliens or monsters he may have brought with him from his magical world, which is just the expanse of the universe. And, it's somewhat interesting to look at in that way, especially as we zoom into Earth. The first thing we see is the sort of normal human characters of the episode, before the TARDIS crash lands. Now I have to say, David Tennant actually looks really good in the Ninth Doctor's costume, and it's sort of a shame that we didn't get to see him in that costume more often. In the majority of this episode, we follow Rose, Jackie, and Mickey as they kind of stand in dread waiting for the Doctor to wake up. Him being in a coma after being changed like a remix, and then risen like a phoenix. And this creates a most likely unintentional parallel. And I want to make this very clear, I don't think this is what Russell T's original intention was for the episode, but I do think it's interesting to look at in this way. And that is creating a parallel between the unconscious 10th Doctor and Jesus after his crucifixion and before his resurrection. And perhaps we could even use it as a parallel of Rose, Jackie, and Mickey representing modern-day Christians waiting in dread for the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now it's really cool, the visual of the golden energy coming out of the Doctor's mouth in this episode just feels very magical, like something you might see in Lord of the Rings, which I think when Doctor Who sort of steps its foot into that fantasy realm is a lot of times when it's at its best. Now this energy would actually be the sort of time vortex energy that back when he was Christopher Eccleston, he of course absorbed from Rose. But later on with Matt Smith, he also has energy coming out of his mouth. So I guess for him it was just regeneration energy. It's kind of one of those areas the pieces don't quite click together. which granted, there's a lot of in Doctor Who. And Jackie asks the question here that I, and probably many of you, have thought about a lot regarding to the Doctor. Is the David Tennant Doctor a different person than the Christopher Eccleston Doctor, or does he just look different? Now, this is probably a bit of a controversial take, but I always like to think about it as the previous Doctor does die and is replaced by something like his child, who also carries all of the memories of the previous Doctor.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Everything I am dies. Some new man goes sauntering away.
Now, I also know that there's a lot of people who really don't like that sort of reading of it, and that's fine. You know, we can have different opinions, and both sort of readings of it are somewhat fair. And after a bit of lines of Rose feeling betrayed by the Doctor and his face-changing shenanigans, we get to see the return of one of my favorite characters of New Who, really. And that is Harriet Jones, who loves telling people what her name is.
Harriet Jones, Prime Minister. Harriet Jones, Prime Minister.
Harriet Jones, Prime Minister.
Harriet Jones, former Prime Minister.
Yeah, I know who you are.
And I absolutely love the brass band Santa robots that instruments double for flamethrowers and machine guns. This is the kind of stuff I really like in Doctor Who. And also, these Santa robots need to return. It's been a while since we've seen them. Russell T., if you're listening, you're writing a Christmas special right now. Please bring back the Santa robots. I would love to see it. And Rose has this interesting line where she's like, oh, the Santa robots are going after us because actually of our connection to the Doctor, because we have the Doctor in our apartment. And I would also like to connect that to my parallel of drawing between the Doctor and Jesus, and just sort of draw the connection between how Rose and Mickey are being attacked because of their relationship with the Doctor, and often how Christians might be attacked and put in danger in a lot of places because of their relationship with Christ in countries that don't have freedom of religion, or if we want to go all the way back to the early church, same deal. Now, the Doctor wakes up and saves our main characters from an evil spinning Christmas tree and calls the Santa robots pilot fish. Pilot fish being a type of fish that will kind of swim alongside a bigger fish and eat off the scraps of what the bigger fish kills and eats himself. I love the Doctor calling them this. I like how it's a little bit educational. You know, I wouldn't have known what pilot fish were if it wasn't for this episode. But now I do know, and I think that's neat. And we're then introduced to the Sycorax. You know, the shark to the robot Santa's pilot fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
I think the Sycorax are awesome. I think they're rad as fudge. They need to come back, because the Sycorax rock.
As in the modern sense they rock.
They're kind of like Doctor Who's version of Klingons from Star Trek, which I'm also a big fan of. They're also a big fan of Queen. And I also find it really interesting that in this episode, the government tries to say that the Sycorax is a hoax. It's just someone in a mask, because there's a very famous unsolved mystery relating to Doctor Who, where way back in the day, one of the episodes was interrupted by someone jamming in who wore a mask. But it's just an interesting parallel. And I love this detail of the TARDIS works as a universal translator, but however, it doesn't work without the Doctor, because the Doctor almost works as part of the TARDIS. I think that's really cool, sort of thinking about the Doctor and the TARDIS as having this symbiotic relationship. And also it makes for a really good moment when you realize that the Doctor has woken up because the Sycorax, the alien, starts speaking English. That moment is really good. Now, I'm not a huge fan on more recent Russell T episodes of Doctor Who, but I have to give him his flowers here for coming up with that moment where the Doctor wakes up and the alien starts speaking English. It's very good. And due to a cup of tea being spilt in the Tardis, the Doctor wakes up and is able to save the day. I kind of like that detail of the tea spilling and that being what wakes the Doctor up. I kind of wish that we got something that would point to the tea waking him up prior to that. You know, just a little line that you could be like, oh, that's right, we knew that tea would help him out. Something like that. But you know, it's a good moment nonetheless. I think Doctor Who actually, it really works good with weird rules, right? I think that's the difference, at least for my personal preference, between good Doctor Who and bad Doctor Who, is for me, I like Doctor Who that has weird rules, but a lot of times Doctor Who has no rules. And I'm not a fan of no rules Doctor Who, I'm a fan of weird rules, right? So, weird rules are like T will help him out after absorbing a bunch of time energy and then regenerating because it kills him. Weird rules are his hand grows back if it gets chopped off, you know, pretty close to his regeneration. No rules are the Doctor only has 12 lives, but the show makes money, so we're going to, you know, write our way around that. Now, I know that they did give a reason for him to continue having lives. It was because the Time Lords gave him more lives. But then after that, Pierre Capaldi's just like, I'll probably keep living forever. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. I need a Doctor who can die. And of course, all that is messed up even more by the Timeless Child reveal, which makes the entire numbering thing nonsense. But that's kind of what I'm saying, is like, I like rules. The rules can be as weird as you want, you know. Cookie dough, eating raw cookie dough turns you into a weeping angel. Right? I'm fine with that as long as you can stay consistent about that really weird rule. I like the sword fight. Sword fight's fun. You know, I feel like a lot of people, especially classic fan people, sort of criticize New Who about it being a little too action-filled, but I enjoy action, and my favorite classic Who Doctor is the Third Doctor. And there's no way to say that the Third Doctor wasn't a bit of an action hero as well. So that's something I think people sort of tend to ignore, that the Doctor has been presented as at least somewhat an action hero all the way back to the Third Doctor. This episode's absolutely fantastic. Seriously, watch it, check it out. It's good in this episode. It kind of just has everything I want in Doctor Who. You know, it has quoting Lion King, it has David Tennant being a goofy boy.
Great big threatening butt.
It has an action sword fight. I love an action sword fight. It feels Christmassy, though it definitely could feel more Christmassy. I just like this episode quite a lot. And I love Harriet Jones destroying the Sycorax. This is something very similar to a John Pertwee, the Third Doctor episode, in which the Brigadier ends up killing the Solarians, and the Doctor gets upset with him. I love how this moment actually paints it as showing a dark side to Harriet Jones and the Doctor both. You know, Harriet Jones decides, kill the Sycorax, right? We need to show them that we're in control here. And then the Doctor takes it into his hands to say, no, I'm gonna take that power away from you. And the way he does it is just really cool and creepy as well. And I like it, you know. The Doctor is supposed to be like sort of a good person to look up to. But some of my favorite moments, particularly of Tennant's Doctor, is when he does those darker moments. I think he's a good actor, so he does these darker moments really cool as well. And I sort of like that idea that sometimes, you know, kids can be watching Doctor Who and they can sort of point to the Doctor and say, hey, that was a good of the Doctor to do. You know, that's just sort of the storytelling I like, because I like my characters occasionally being morally questionable and, you know, leaving the audience to be like, I don't think that was the right thing for that character to do. I love that stuff. With all that being said, I'm going to do a throwback to some of my earlier videos, and I'm going to just tag on a moral of this story. The sort of moral I have for this story is that if you're maybe a Christian like me and, you know, you've sort of been praying for something, right? You want God's help. You know, and this is the parallel I'm drawing to Rose and the Doctor when the Christmas tree is coming after her and she sort of whispers in the Doctor's ear and asks him for help. Right, and I think the moral I want to take away is that you can actually rest in knowing that God will work in His time for your life. So that's sort of my moral of this story, is when you need help, God is listening, so you can just pray and wait. Cast all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. But with all that being said, this has been Doctor Who Christmas Special of 2005, The Christmas Invasion. What did you think of this episode? Do you hate the Bible parallels I drew from it? Are you okay with them but think they don't really fit? Do you dislike the Sycorax? I'm interested to hear any thoughts you might have on this episode in the comments below. I usually try to respond to any comments I get, but with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and Merry Christmas. I wore a green and red suit for this, so I hope you liked it. I think it's pretty good. I might just start dressing like this all the time. Bye!